Today's guest is used to asking the questions, not answering them. She's Australia's first female host of a national radio sports program, has covered 14 Olympic Games and numerous World Cups, and in 2023 was awarded the Australian Sports Commission Lifetime Achievement Award. I've been lucky enough to get to know her a little bit over the last 3 years since doing Her Way, so thanks so much for joining me today, Tracey Holmes.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Abby. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So excited to chat to you. So I know for me personally, I don't really like being interviewed as much as interviewing someone else because, I'm used to being able to control it as I'm doing today. But I think you've interviewed me about 4 times, but this is the first time I've chatted to you. So what's it like for you being on the other end of things?
I'm a bit like you. I always think it's interesting when people say, can we do an interview with you? Because it's like, what have I got to say? It's so much better being able to ask the questions and being surprised by things and trying to pull a story out of somebody. So it's always a bit weird when you're on the other side.
Yeah, I'm finally getting, I guess I could say, some payback. No, I'm just getting you back for all those times you have interviewed me.
But you were always great. That's why I kept coming back.
Oh, thank you.
If I never came back after the first one, you'd have reason to be worried. But no, you just, I think when you love something, when you know something, when you're confident in who you are, when you know you've got something to say, you can just do it. And I've always been impressed by you, Abby, for that reason.
Well, thank you. I love chatting to you every time. Every time you ask me, I'm very honest. So thank you.
No worries.
But I did want to go back to your childhood. I know there's probably a lot to talk about today, but I just wanted to know what role sport played in your childhood when you were a kid.
Well, I grew up, first of all, when I was about 2. Mum and Dad decided to go to South Africa because they were both surfers. My dad made surfboards and they heard the surf was good over there. My dad's older brother had moved there, so we hopped on a boat and went on a very long ride and ended up in South Africa. We stayed there for about 7 years.
Wow.
And one of the first surfing contests, in fact it's the world's longest running surfing contest. It used to be called the Grandstand 500. Then it became the Durban 500. I don't know what it is now, but my mum helped start that.
Oh, wow.
And so my dad competed in it. My dad made surfboards for a few of the other competitors. And then it's a fascinating story because South Africa was apartheid at the time, and so some of the beaches were whites-only beaches. The hotels were whites-only hotels. And my mum and the crew that had worked on this event invited surfers from everywhere, and some of them weren't white, obviously. When they came into South Africa, they were given honorary white visas, which means nothing when you rock up at a hotel or a beach where you're not supposed to be if you're not white. And so it was quite hard for them. So my mum said to them, look, forget about staying in hotels and places like that, just come and stay with us. So they came into our home, and there were parties every night, and all the surfers were there, and
wow.
Just used to sit there listening to all these accents and different stories about different parts of the world. Anyway, to cut a long story short, when some of the Hawaiian surfers went back to Hawaii, their mum and dad wrote to my mum and dad and said, our boys wouldn't have survived without you, so we'd like to return the favour. You have to come and visit us. So we didn't just go and visit them, we packed our suitcases, got rid of anything we owned, we moved in with them. So we lived in Hawaii for a while, yeah. And then eventually we ended up back in Australia. And so surfing has always been, I guess it was the cornerstone of my life.
It seems like it was the core of your family. I mean, wherever the good surf was, that's kind of where you moved.
Exactly. Well, I had a childhood on a beach. As a result, I've had in the last couple of weeks, 5 skin cancers cut out, but it's kind of like occupational hazard.
So you never really did any other sports? It was kind of just
surfing? So when I was at school, I always did sport.
Okay.
I played netball, I played basketball, I did athletics, and to be frank, the best event in athletics was walking. High jump, I was okay. Yeah, I kind of did everything, yeah.
So did you ever think of becoming an elite athlete, kind of pursuing a career?
Absolutely not. Zero interest. I'm not competitive in a kind of physical sense.
Okay.
I've got no interest in beating people. It just seems so sort of foreign to me. My sister got all of those genes. She's very competitive. Where I'm competitive, I think it's like a personal competitiveness. So I like to continue to do better in what I do. So I measure myself quite harshly. but I'm not interested in comparing myself to anybody else, or seeing who wins or who comes out on top. That's just, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find that so interesting that you can be so passionate about like reporting on sport and being a journalist, but you just don't have that same interest for playing.
Yeah, and I think, so my interest probably is, it's probably the psychology of sport.
Okay.
So one of the reasons why I ended up focusing on sport, not other things, is that I find athletes super driven people. Generally speaking, they're positive. They have to be, because if you get smashed in an event, you've got to be able to get back up and pull yourself together and say, okay, how am I going to do better next time? And so I find them generally hyper-motivated, very positive, driven, and those sorts of minds really intrigue me. So I like to know how they work and how they function and how they pick themselves back up. So that was my initial interest in sport. And then, you come to realise sport's got everything else as well. It's got the politics, it's got nature, it's got whatever you want, you can find it in sport.
So I guess when you were like starting out and like studying at uni, because I think you were studying communications. Were you studying communications at uni?
Well, actually, I started studying public relations, at TAFE, because when I finished my HSC, I'd worked all the way through school. So I was, quite busy at school. I did some extracurricular activities at school, and I was also working on weekends. I'd work in a surf shop in Manly, or in the summer, I would work also in my school holidays at this little cafe at one of the little beaches. So I was always working, always busy. And I finished my HSC and I thought, oh, good, I can have a bit of a rest. And I'll be honest, I used to sleep in, My mum rang me one morning, it was about 11 o'clock, and I answered the phone, hello. And she said, were you still asleep? I said, yes. She said, okay, when I get home, you're to be enrolled in a course, have a full-time job, or have moved out. So I thought, okay, that's probably the kick in the backside I needed.
Yeah.
So I just did all three. And so the first thing I saw, I thought, okay, I can do part-time study. Here's this public relations event, because I'd also worked on surfing contests all the way through school. And especially in high school, I was looking after the media at quite a lot of events, because I knew all the surfers, I could help line up interviews, and I just knew how it all functioned. So when I started doing public relations, one of the first teachers I had was a lady called Kim McKay, and she is fantastic. She was partners in a PR firm, and a few weeks into the course she said to me, listen, we've got a job coming up for a junior, publicist. Would you like to come and work for me? And I thought, oh, that'd be good. She had quite a few sporting events as clients, but the same week I started there, the World Surfing Circuit approached this PR company to do their PR for them for some of the major events. And I was like, are you joking? So it just kind of fell into place like that. And then what happened, after I worked with her for a while, then I was travelling and doing more and more surfing events. And then I worked for the Bicentennial Authority in 1988, which really ages me. I was 21 at the time, and I was the national publicist for the sports program. And there were like 1,500 different sporting events in that 1 year.
Wow.
And I was at all of them. And because there weren't enough journos to cover everything, I'd provide reports. So I'd ring AAP and give them a print report. I'd phone the radio stations, and I happened to be doing quite a lot of stuff for different ABC stations all around the country. And at the end of the year, George Gradusich, who was the sports editor in WA, former AFL player or WAFL player, not women's AFL, as in WA AFL. He rang me and said, listen, would you be interested in an ABC broadcast trainee? And so they used to run these 2-year programs, which were phenomenal. And so you actually get a trained background across everything. So current affairs, news, sport, you have to do the lot. It was such an excellent program, and I think broadcast media these days is far worse because the ABC doesn't offer that anymore. So I was one of the last ones to come through before they kind of canned it for whatever reason. But some of the best broadcasters across every genre, not just sport, but news, current affairs, that worked in all of the major broadcast television networks, they had ABC traineeships. And so that then kind of kick-started the next part of my career.
I was going to say, it does sound like that was kind of the beginning of everything. And I guess,
Yeah.
like you said, where you kind of got taught everything. Because
Yeah.
I know you don't like to talk about it a lot, but you are kind of a trailblazer for women in sport. But I think you were talking like on a panel at UTS. It was that one that we were both at a little while ago. And you were saying you kind of don't like agree with the saying you can't be what you can't see, because I guess you kind of had to do everything for yourself. You were kind of one of the first women in that space, like working in sports journalism. But I guess how were you kind of just navigating that like early on?
Well, you see, I think it's because my mum and my dad both competed as surfers that I never saw them as being different, one from the other. I did notice, though, when we came back to Australia, it was still very segregated, you know, like even if people got together, if it was a barbecue or, I don't know, adults meeting at the pub or whatever, it's like the women would go there and talk and the men would go there and talk, and it was quite interesting because that hadn't really been my experience. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it, but it did seem particularly obvious when I came back here. And it might have just been the age I was as well, and starting to notice these sorts of things. But I've never thought of myself as any different to the men or any of the other women, or I don't look at people like that. I just kind of, I look at human beings, you know, how they are, what their story is, how they work with other people. And so even though when I was at the ABC, I was the only female broadcaster there for a period, I just never thought of it that way. Even to the point where I got called in by the head of the department one day, and he said, "Oh, there's this special conference that's happening next month, and it's all about women in broadcasting, you know, and we'd like you to go." And I said, "No, I don't want to go. I've got no interest. Like, I don't want to be sidelined. I don't care. I'm not a woman in broadcasting. I happen to be a woman, but I work in broadcasting. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. It doesn't matter." And so it's quite interesting now when I still hear people discussing this issue, because I've never looked at it that way. You know, I've never gone, I'm different to all the blokes doing this. I thought, no, I'm exactly the same as all the blokes doing this, because they like doing it. They like talking to athletes. That's what I like doing. So we're the same.
So have you had to actually like try to change people's minds about that?
Yeah, I don't try and change people's minds, because I think people's minds, if they're going to be changed, they will change through their own experience, you know, of meeting people like you or me or you know, because they might not have ever had that opportunity before.
Yeah.
And so some people, their minds will change naturally through their own growth. Some people, you'll never change their minds, so it's not even worth trying to do it. You know, something my husband says to me all the time, you know, a bigot's always going to be a bigot, you know, or a scorpion, they might appear to be really nice, but, you know, what scorpions do is bite people, so don't complain when the scorpion bites you, you know, and it's like, it's true. You can spend a lot of time worrying about stuff that, for me, I've just left on the periphery. You know, that's not to say that sometimes people will treat you differently, and I had that experience. There were a couple of women who were working in print journalism at the time, same time as I was going through the ABC. People like Nicole Jeffrey, Jacqueline Magnay, there were quite a few. Margie McDonald has been around for a long time. But, you know, I remember being at State of Origin and all the blokes would be allowed into the dressing room to do the interviews and the women had to wait outside. And I remember complaining to Queensland one day saying, "But you've taken all the blokes in and you've just left me out here." And he's like, "Well, you can't come in because you're different." I said, "No, I'm not different. We're all here doing the same job." And so then he let me in. And so I got an interview with Wally Lewis. I was pretty happy about that.
Well, I do know that you've worked as a journalist, I guess, in lots of different countries, UAE, China, South Korea. I was doing a bit of research on that. It's pretty cool, all the places that you work. But have you noticed like a difference in just how, I guess, journalists are treated, or just how sports journalism is in terms of that, like in the other countries?
Sure. So this is another reason why I love sport, because it tells you so much about the culture of a place. And so even if you look at sporting teams and the way they compete, so if you look at the Matildas and the Socceroos, their style is quite Australian. And when you talk to other people from other countries about that, they go, yeah, you know, the Australian style, it's kind of, it's tough, it's rough, you know, it's not sort of finessed. And it tells you a bit about our culture, which we don't see because we're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
We see other people's cultures because when we go there, it's something new, it's something different, and we're surprised by some of it. And so then you start to realise the more time you spend overseas, you look back at Australia and go, okay, now I can see what we are or how we are. And so that's always been such a great learning opportunity, being able to go and live in other countries. And I just feel so lucky that it happened when I was a kid and everything was sort of formulating in my mind. And then I've had the same sorts of experiences as an adult, you know, living and working in other places, and sort of, we always try, because my husband's a journalist as well, and we always try and hop into a local place. We never go and live where the expats live, because we wanted our kids to have the sort of experience that I had when I was a kid. Yeah, so it's been really wonderful.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There is something I did want to, I think you've actually asked me this before in some interviews, kind of talking about like politics in sport, which I guess we've seen a bit of recently, but I actually wanted to get like your point of view and just ask, like, do you think it does appear in sport? And yeah, what are your like kind of views on that?
Yeah, so this is the thing, when I started answering that last question about sport teaches us so much about the culture of a place. And so when you look at any country, you look at the world, you know, politics is everywhere. So it's really stupid to think that it's not going to impact sport. But I think the unique thing about sports politics is that you've not only got the politics of like geopolitical landscape and the national politics of a place, you know, so does the Australian government support one sport more than another for whatever reason? You know, how do they determine who they're going to fund and who they're going to use for sports diplomacy, like we're seeing a lot now? We've seen footballers be used quite a bit in our relationship with China and Indonesia. You've also got the politics of sport. And because most people don't care and are not looking, because most people just want to go out and support their team over the weekend and hope that they win, feel bad if they lose, and they turn up next week because they're fans, and that's great. That says a lot about, you know, the culture of a place.
Yeah.
But what it means is there's a lot of people not looking at what's going on in head office in sport. And there are some very strange things that can happen in sport. So, you know, if you love politics, sport's got more politics than politics.
So do you like that they're kind of the same? Do you like that there's a lot of politics in sport, or would you want they kind of stay a bit more separate?
No, I think if you're a fan, you don't want politics in sport, you know, because you just want to love your team. You want to ride that wave of, you know, success or struggle with your team, and that's fine. But I'm not a fan. I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm just saying I'm not a traditional fan. I've never really supported one person or team over any other. I'm just fascinated by how all of that works. And because of that, I think the politics has always intrigued me, because, again, that's what determines how something is going to grow or which direction it's going to go in. Like, you look at the politics of the Middle East at the moment, and they're really making their mark on a world scale because they're using sport. Many in the West call that sports washing. I hate that term, because we use sport. You know, when England decided to go and take over countries all over the world, they used sport. They took their cricket teams, they took their football teams, you know, so I'm always wary of kind of using these sort of words that just become terribly negative, because I think if you look for the patterns, it happened, and we did a similar thing. So it's just interesting to watch how the world is shaped and how it gets reshaped, and how sport is used as a tool for all of those sorts of things. So sport is so much more than sport. You know, it's so much more than a game being played on a court or on a park. It's so much more than a score. It tells us everything about life, really, and how we exist in this little ecosystem.
Yeah, and I guess obviously you've done a lot of stories about sports, and not just about the sports, but I guess the politics and stuff beyond that. But I did want to ask, because obviously you've been a journalist for quite a lot of years, but do you have like a story or maybe yeah, one that just really stands out to you that you were maybe to make a big impact with writing it or with having it?
Not really. I'm really terrible at thinking back because I'm always looking forward, like what's going to happen next and where's this going now? So I'm not very good at looking back, and this was a bit of a problem when I was writing my book too, because they're like, no, we want to know more about this. It's like, yeah, but I don't care. You know, that was so long ago. There are different things. So I think, you know, more than sort of having a broad impact, and there have been some things I've done which have broadly impacted, beyond the story itself. It sort of resonated and kept going and things changed. So it's good that happens. But there are just snippets of things that I think about. Like one of the interviews that I remember doing was with Arthur Ashe, who was the first black man to win Wimbledon. He was an American tennis player, beautiful tennis player, a beautiful human being. And when I was doing Grandstand the first time, which was sort of through the 1990s, I started this segment called the Hall of Fame. And so I wanted to talk to older people to get their perspectives because sport's changing so quickly. Yeah. But they've got great lessons because it was so much harder for them. Anyway, I did an interview with Arthur Ashe, and he, you know, despite sort of breaking through all these barriers, and it was so huge what he achieved on the tennis court, but he'd had a heart attack and he had a blood transfusion, and it appears that he had a bad batch of blood that was transfused, and he got AIDS, and they couldn't save you from AIDS in those days. And so I remember speaking to him, and his daughter was about 7 or 8 at the time, and I said, so when you look at life now, what do you look at, you know, and do you think sometimes, like, why me? Why should this happen to me? And he said, no, I never think that, because if it wasn't me, it would have been someone else, and I wouldn't want to wish that on anyone. And I thought, oh my God, what a great lesson. And then he said, and what I look forward to now, I just hope I make my daughter's next birthday. And I thought, oh, again, like, these are sort of lessons in perspective and perspective on life and what is important. And so it's sort of snippets like that I remember from specific interviews that I've always held with me. You know, one of the other ones was when I was at the FIFA Men's World Cup in 1998 in France. So it was my first Men's World Cup, and it was amazing. Again, for all sorts of reasons. So, like, the World Cup is just incredible. It's great. You're at the Women's World Cup. You know about that. Yeah. So France was incredible. The Men's World Cup was incredible. But it was also at a time of when hooliganism was massive. And it was outrageous, and it just seemed that everywhere me and my cameraman happened to be, there was a riot. And so in the end, some of the SBS crew were calling us hooligan because we were there in the middle of some, you know, pretty awful experiences. But I remember being at one of the post-match press conferences, and one of the captains, Uruguay, I think it was, his name is Chilavert. Uruguay? People are going to kill me. Soccer aficionados are going to kill me. Anyway, I remember his name, Chilavert, and he was the captain. He was a goalkeeper. He was sitting at the press conference. He was eating an apple, and it was packed, like the Men's World Cup press conferences. Like, I can imagine. 100, 200 people. And someone at the back of the room asked him, you know, how do you feel now, the pressure, you're in the quarterfinals, you know, along those lines. And he stopped eating his apple and he looked, and he put the apple on the table, and you could see he was really affronted by this question. And he looked at the guy and he said, I'm going to tell you something. We are playing a game of football. Don't talk to me about pressure. Pressure is when you do not have enough money to give your kids food, to put food on the table at night. That's pressure. That's the pressure some people are having right now. Don't talk to me about pressure of a World Cup. And again, it's one of those things that you go, wow, you know, it's kind of very enlightening. And I love those snippets that come out of people's mouths and minds.